Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Blessed Geza is called off his so-called 31st March uprising after 2 days. I think the various stakeholders will have their own spin on whether or not the uprising was a failure or a success. ZANU-PF spin doctors have been out to say it was a complete failure. The number of protesters that had been anticipated did not materialize. Well, indeed, if one was to think of the 2017, the hundreds of thousands of people who came out to support the military coup that year, one would have expected that the crowd would be a lot bigger than we saw. And ZANU-PF want to see that as a success. I think Geza and his followers would say, well, okay, the crowd was not so big, but if you take into consideration the fact that most urban centers, there was no business taking place. Harare streets in particular were completely deserted, at least for a significant part of the day. That was a success. ZANU-PF would want to dismiss that and say, well, the streets were deserted because Geza threatened violence, and having the police on the street, as ZANU-PF did, that increased the people's worry that there will be violence. In 2017, there was no threat of any violence at all. So the people knew they could come out without any fear. It is true. But nonetheless, I would argue that given the passion that this whole affair raised, the expectation it raised, I would expected a lot more people to come out, even at the risk of being beaten by the police. Ever since Geza made his announcement, end of January, and he dismissively dismissed Mnangagwa's claim that he should be allowed to stay in power so that he could deliver economic prosperity. His argument that ED 2030 should be seen through because he was the only man who was on course to deliver the nation's upper middle income status by 2030. The truth of the matter is there is no sign that that is happening. And it is ridiculous that he should be allowed to overstay his two-term maximum limit on a false pretense that is delivering economic prosperity. Totally agree with people. Totally agree with Geza when he dismissed that as bullshit. It is bullshit. But since making that announcement, people have been following what Geza has been saying. And I think one of the biggest bone of contention has been the clear sign that as much as Geza is against corruption, mismanagement, and tyranny by ZANU-PF, he was against the Mnangagwa and those close to him specifically. No one could be fooled into believing that Chiwenga and those who would be around him would not be equally corrupt, incompetent, and useless. In other words, many people begin to see that this so-called uprising was nothing but a repeat of the 2017 coup. The people had supported it. Yes, some of them were only interested in getting rid of Mugabe, and they were thankful that the army staged a coup. Not aware, of course, the fact that the people who were staging the coup are the same people who had actually been rigging elections to make sure that Mugabe stayed in power. But the other group of people were also genuinely believed that the coup would deliver some meaningful democratic change. They were quickly disappointed. Mnangagwa promised to stamp out corruption. I think very few people would deny that corruption in Zimbabwe has gone into overdrive under his watch. Mnangagwa also promised to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Anyone with half a brain would have told you back in 2017 that that was one promise he was never going to keep. He and his fellow coup plotters had risked their own lives to stage that coup. To seriously believe they were going to risk losing power by implementing democratic reforms so that elections are free, fair, and credible? No chance. So the people of Zimbabwe have quickly realized that Geza's so-called uprising was nothing but a repeat of 2017. They were conned in 2017. The question now is, are you willing to be conned again, yet again? And I believe that is the main reason why many people did not participate in the so-called 31st March uprising. Let's just listen to Geza calling off the the uprising.
I've decided to call off the protest. This is because I've gathered intelligence of an evil plan. Sean Mnangagwa bought explosives. He wants to bomb 7 targets. If
I'm sorry about the sound. Seem to be having some problems with the soundtrack of that video clip. But basically, what you are saying is it's called off the uprising because ZANU-PF was plotting to carry out some acts of violence, and they were trying to frame him and his supporters. One cannot comment whether it's true or not. But nonetheless, if the public support of this uprising had been overwhelming, as he had hoped it would be, I don't think he would have had any problem continuing with the uprising. That would be just another thing that this tyrannical regime would want to do, to disrupt the uprising by whatever means they can. So I don't think this is really a valid excuse. I have explored and explained why I believe many people were disillusioned by Geza. We cannot pretend that Geza was not, and his close friends were not part and parcel of the same ZANU-PF regime that has governed the country for the last 45 years. Just as much as we could not pretend that those who staged the military coup of 2017 had not been part and parcel of the ZANU-PF dictatorship that had kept Mugabe in power all these years. And so, to endorse the military coup in 2017 was to accept that this was just replacing one dictator with another and hope for the best. And this time, Geza made it very clear that they are looking at Chiwenga taking over from Mnangagwa. I don't think anyone can really argue that Chiwenga is not corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. To keep repeating the same foolish mistake was an outrage. One other issue that some people have raised is why, as the opposition, notably Triple C, the various factions of Triple C and MDC, not come out right in support or condemnation of the uprising. I think there's a very simple explanation for that. As much as they would have been galvanized if Geza and company had sat down with them and assured them that Chiwenga would form a government of national unity, and they would be able to occupy some ministerial positions. I think that would have galvanized some of our opposition leaders. They would have tried to get their supporters to come out in the street in support of this uprising. I still dispute this issue of the threat of violence kept many Zimbabweans away from the street. I think many Zimbabweans have suffered under this regime. And if they genuinely believed that this regime, this uprising, was offering them a realistic way out, they would have come out in support of it. But when people started saying this is just a repeat of 2017, even the opposition leaders themselves quickly realized that they would lose their own political career, or whatever little there is of it, if they were to commit to people coming out in support of this uprising. When people are saying we were fooled, we were taken advantage of in 2017, and we are not going to repeat that mistake. Because it is strange that the MDC, the Morgan Trangirai, the Chamisa, the Ndaibiti, and so forth, and all the other opposition leaders, while some of them did not come out in support of 2017, their objection of it was very muted. So in this particular case, one would say if they directly or indirectly supported a military coup in 2017, it is disappointing, to say the least, that they should fail to support a democratic protest to demand reform, because that's what it is. The Geza uprising is nothing compared to the military coup of 2017. That was an act of treason. And yet, they were willing to support it. I think our calculating opposition leaders realized that their influence on this matter was very much limited. There was no way they were going to convince the people that this is a meaningful fight for change when it was clear all that was happening is a repeat of 2017, swapping one dictator for another. I've said it on this platform and many others that the people of Zimbabwe in 2017, and being repeated now, with this uprising were being offered a false choice. A false choice is one where you are told you can pick either A or B, when in reality, the two are equally unpalatable. I've often compared it to a mouse being told they can pick a cobra or a black mamba. If you're a mouse, you know that one bite from either snake will kill you. So, what kind of a choice is that? It's a false choice. The real choice that the people of Zimbabwe had here, and they've had all along, is we have a dictatorship that is there on the ground, or we can fight to end the dictatorship and replace it with a democracy. In other words, the choice is dictatorship or democracy. That is the real choice. If you are going to go for the swap of one dictator for another, which is what people did in 2017, you are saying, I've already elected a dictatorship. It's just a matter of now which dictator I want. That is meaningless. Why would you select a dictatorship when you know that it doesn't really matter who the dictator is? You are in trouble. Why would you want to pretend the mouse has got a choice of a black mamba or a cobra when the mouse itself knows that a bite from either snake would kill it? I hope that the failure of the so-called Geza uprising is a wake-up call, is a result of the people realizing that they were being offered a false choice and saying no to a false choice. Some people, since Geza's pronouncement on this issue, have been asking, well, should we not go for supporting Geza and stop Mnangagwa's ED 2030 agenda? And so that question would be even more relevant now. Now that Geza's uprising has failed, does that mean the cost is clear for Mnangagwa to amend the constitution so that he could stay in power beyond 2028 when he's supposed to leave? It is an important question. But let me dismiss the point that it would have made sense to go for the false choice of supporting Geza just to stop Mnangagwa. In other words, having a dictator just to get rid of the present one. We had that false choice in 2017. Yes, we managed to get rid of Mugabe. But look what we got in his place. If you call that progress, I don't know what is. One of the reasons why people wanted Mugabe to go is because they feared that he was trying to establish his own dynasty, grooming his wife to be president and surrounding her with guys who were loyal to her, including relatives. No sooner had we got rid of Mugabe, Mnangagwa got in. And look what he has been doing too. One of the reasons why people are panicking about this whole thing is that at the present moment, as far as Mnangagwa is concerned, he has got two plans. Plan A is that he changes the constitution to allow him to stay in power beyond 2028 when he's supposed to leave. That will entail amending the constitution. Having amended the constitution, this could get the amendment approved by the people in a referendum. I'll come back to that. Plan B is that he is grooming his own close relatives. There is no doubt that many influential positions in government and in business have been of Mnangagwa loyalists. The purpose is of consolidating power. So even if he doesn't succeed in staying in power, he would want to be the one who nominates his successor. The people will just rubber stamp his wishes. And that successor will be surrounded by people who are loyal to Mnangagwa. And he may find that changing the system would be near impossible. I think the two options are equally unpalatable to Zimbabweans because it underlines the very issue, the very essence of, and explains, in fact, why we are a failed state. For the last 45 years, Zimbabweans have not had a meaningful say in the governance of the country because ZANU-PF has never held free, fair, and credible elections. So the ZANU-PF regimes that have ruled the country for the last 45 years have been selected by the lucky few, including these war veterans themselves, at the expense of the ordinary people. The people have never had a chance. Geza himself is now determined to get rid of Mnangagwa just because he has found himself in the wrong basket. The faction that he is in has been pushed aside by those close to Mnangagwa, just as much as those who staged the coup in 2017 found themselves being elbowed out of the way by the G40s. This is what is at the heart of the problem. Geza, with his uprising, was not offering to end the dictatorship, to ensure that there are free, fair, and credible elections. On the contrary, he wanted to keep that power. Indeed, I've said it before and I'll say it again. If the Geza uprising had succeeded and Chiwenga succeeded Mnangagwa, the first issue would be Chiwenga will finish Mnangagwa's term just as Mnangagwa finished Mugabe's term. Come 2028 elections, I can rest assure you that Chiwenga was going to rig those elections. Make no mistake about it. He was not going to risk losing power after having waited for all these years, after being the one who issued the coup, the order to carry out the coup in 2017, and then be betrayed by Mnangagwa. After waiting all this and risking all this, and we know that the relationship between him and Mnangagwa these last few months have been absolutely tense. That's the two main fight for power. After risking all that, you seriously believe he was going to implement democratic reforms to ensure that the people of Zimbabwe finally had a meaningful say in the governance of the country, and they could vote him and his colleagues out of office, then you need your head examined. Of course, he wasn't going to hold free, fair, and credible elections. So it brings us back to where we were. And what is there to say that once he is in power, he will not also seek to make sure that he stays in power for 10 years, and as the 10 years get nearer, may also seek to extend or to have his own dynasty. So this whole thing would not have finished if Mnangagwa had been booted out as Geza had hoped, that the 31st March uprising would see Mnangagwa put out of office. I said I'll come back to the referendum. The referendum is a part of the requirement. As much as Mnangagwa may think he has got the MPs, senators in his pocket, which he does, there's no disputing that. What Mnangagwa cannot deny is that he still, even if the Parliament and the Senate should approve the constitutional amendment allowing him to postpone 2028 elections so that he could stay in power until 2030. That amendment, the law is very clear, the constitution is very clear, must be approved by the people in a referendum. The referendum itself may be just a simple majority, 50% plus one. Of course, if you're familiar with Zimbabwean elections, you'll also be familiar with the fact that ZANU-PF has never held free, fair, and credible elections. In 45 years and counting. And also has managed to get away with rigged elections. There is one significant difference. In 2008, ZANU-PF blatantly cheated in the March vote because the party was losing. And this allowed them to force a runoff. And during the runoff, the party used wanton violence to make sure that their candidate, Mugabe, won the runoff. SADC, the AU, refused to accept the result. It was because SADC and the AU refused to recognize Mugabe and ZANU-PF following the 2008 elections that forced that dictator and the regime to sign the 2008 global political agreement that gave birth to the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms necessary to stop ZANU-PF rigging elections in future. That was the primary purpose of the GNU. It is a pity that the majority of Zimbabweans out there still have no clue what the GNU was about. None. Even now, with the benefit of hindsight. Worse still, they have no clue that the MDC leaders failed to implement even one token reform during the 5 years of the GNU. Why? Because Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office. The E-Class Mercedes-Benz for Prime Minister Changirai and his two deputy prime ministers, for all the MDC ministers and deputy ministers, and equally posh cars for all the MDC MPs and senators. Very generous salaries all round, and equally generous packs. A US $4 million mansion to our friend Morgan Trangirai, while the MDC leaders had their snouts in the feeding trough. They forgot about the reforms. That is the reality. And one of the greatest disappointments is that millions of Zimbabweans out there, even now with the benefit of hindsight, remain ignorant of that political reality. This is at the heart of our failed political system. I hope the penny has dropped. This has contributed also to the people refusing to go out in support of Geza uprising, because they're beginning to see their politicians for who they are: corrupt, incompetent, and always taking advantage of the people. In short, Mnangagwa would not win the referendum amending the constitution if that referendum was free, fair, and credible. SADC in the AU judged Zimbabwe's 2023 elections as flawed and illegal. They did not go the next step and deny ZANU-PF legitimacy because Zimbabweans had participated in those elections in their millions. Because the opposition had participated in those elections. And the few who did win a few gravy train seats had gone on to take up their seats even after SADC had said the process was flawed. This is an issue that will keep coming back to again and again on this issue. And will provide evidence to show that if MDC had not participated, the outcome of that election would have been totally different. At least SADC would have denied ZANU-PF legitimacy. That is an important point. I believe that people of Zimbabwe should not participate in the referendum unless and until ZANU-PF implements the democratic reforms that's required by SADC in the AU. Now that SADC and the AU have condemned the process, we only have to take advantage of that. If ZANU-PF was to go ahead and hold the elections, and the people of Zimbabwe refuse to participate, this time I believe SADC will have a leg to stand on to deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy. However, if people are once again conned into participating, then of course SADC and the AU may find themselves in a situation where, as much as they will condemn the process as flawed and illegal, they will do nothing else. Indeed, ZANU-PF is hoping that SADC will play no role in the referendum. In the past, SADC has never supervised the referendum. So you can get away with it. But if we are smart enough, we'll see to it that either ZANU-PF implements the reforms to make sure that that process is free, fair, and credible, or we do not participate. And I can tell you now, if ZANU-PF was to implement the democratic reforms, they will never win that referendum. Never. And so we would have achieved stopping Chwenka coming in to replace Mnangagwa and have another swap of dictator, one dictator for another, and still achieve our main objective of choosing democracy over dictatorship. That is true. That is the political reality. And I am seriously hoping that the people of Zimbabwe are really beginning to open their eyes and their minds and appreciating the complexities of our political situation. And most important of all, waking up to the reality that they've been incredibly naive and gullible. And this is why politicians from all sides of the political divide have exploited that weakness, conning them to do one foolish thing after another. I'm seriously hoping that history would say the people of Zimbabwe refused to be used by Blessed Geza when he called for the uprising on the 31st of March 2025, because they'd realized that this was an uprising that was not going to change anything. It was an uprising giving the people a false choice. We were being asked to pick one dictator from another. A mouse being asked to elect a cobra or a black mamba. The people woke up to that reality and realized this was a false choice. The real choice is ending the dictatorship and replacing it with a democratic system of government. We have a fight in our hands. And I think democracy can easily be achieved. It is within our powers to achieve it. The only demand is that we should be smart enough to know our own weaknesses and strengths. And one of our strengths is being able to think for ourselves so that we are not easily conned. We are not easily conned into accepting false choices. Food for thought. Thank you very much. I hope you'll be able to join us again tomorrow, 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time. Good night.